Hi everyone, this is Steve Barrett, Editor-in-Chief of PRWeek. We're about to record our weekly podcast, the PR Week, with our special guest, Simon Kelly, who's from Story Worldwide. Simon, welcome to the PR Week podcast. Good to have you here.
Well, I'm honoured to be here.
Well, we're honoured to have you, and thank you for stepping in at the last minute because we had a guest cancel. Not that we wouldn't have had you on at some point anyway, but
what's that smell like?
So we're going to talk to Simon. He runs a content marketing agency called Story Worldwide, part of Next 15. We've got Frank Washkuch here as a normal correspondent, news editor. How are you doing, Frank?
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Did you enjoy International Women's Day?
It was the best
Yes,
one
it
yet.
was. Lots of traffic for our content on that, and we'll talk about that a bit later. And a bunch of other things, but we're going to get straight into it. So if you've got any comments, please pen them at the end of this on this feed. But hope you enjoy the show, and we're going to get going. Hello and welcome to the PR Week, PR Week's regular weekly roundup of everything that matters in the worlds of PR and communications. My name's Steve Barrett. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of PR Week, going to guide you gently through the next 20, maybe 25 minutes as we review all the big stories, big events of the week. Another crazy busy week in communications land, and we'll be reviewing those as well as interviewing our special guest. It's Simon Kelly, Chief Executive Officer and Chief Enthusiasm Officer, Simon, a double CEO and co-founder of Story Worldwide, part of Next 15. Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Steve. And I do think that I might hand over the title of Chief Enthusiasm Officer to you.
Well, I thought I'd be even more enthusiastic than normal because we have a Chief Enthusiasm Officer in the room.
I didn't think it was possible, but
Many of.
I feel at home now.
Exactly, yeah.
I feel like there's another one.
I'm always being accused of being over enthusiastic. Ask anyone, yeah. Or maybe not.
Frank, is this true?
Sure. Yes, all the time.
Yeah, this is Frank Washkuch, who's our other guest, regular weekly correspondent. Frank, PR Week's news editor. Another busy week for you.
Yes, it was. It has been for the past few months for some reason. Can't put my finger on
No,
that.
that's for sure. Lots going on, lots to talk about, and we'll get into those topics. We'll talk to Simon, then we'll talk about Torrid Neptune and Gary Sheffer, new roles for those bastions of the PR world. We'll talk about International Women's Day and PR Week's release of our 2017 Hall of Fame this week to tie in with that. We've also announced our Communicator of the Year, Oscar Munoz at United Airlines, and he'll be receiving that award next week at the PR Week Awards. We'll talk about Uber's ongoing reputational issues and what they can do about that, if anything. And we'll end on healthcare legislation, lots going on around that in DC especially. So yeah, lots to talk about. Simon, let's start with you. So I mentioned that you run a content agency, but you've actually, I mean, it's the flavour of the month, isn't it, content? But you've actually been doing that since 1997, and you in fact were one of the founders of the Custom Content Council. So explain how you got into content marketing so early.
Well, thanks for that. Actually, I would probably say that we were more of a storytelling agency than a content agency.
Oh,
I think,
okay.
at least now, 20 years ago, I think it was about content. Everybody has jumped on the bandwagon, but really our background was as custom publishers. And to be an effective custom publisher, you've got to think about the audience. You would know this as publishers, as much as you think about the brand. And so that really as the world changed, the internet came along 20 years ago, and then social and mobile and all of the other
Good stuff.
other channels, it was clear to us that everything that we learned as custom publishers, you could apply to custom content, and it's really thinking about the audience first, and then finding ways in which you can engage the audience with the brand, as opposed to, I think a lot of agencies think about the brand only, and what's the brand message, and then how can you use the different channels to get the message across.
In fact, I remember you speaking at our conference maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I mean, maybe even longer actually now.
Right.
And you mentioned something which was very, which stuck with me, Simon, as lots of the things you say.
It's about the only thing that stuck with me. We can talk about that later.
No, we're talking about the birth of brand content, and you pointed out rightfully that the Michelin guides were our brand content, and that they were founded in what, 1894, was it?
Something like that, yeah. And it's we talk a lot about the brand's authority to publish, and obviously Michelin as a tire company, a place that You use vehicles to travel, around. It was supposed to be a tour guide around different restaurants around France, and they have complete authority to create that kind of content.
Exactly, yeah. So a really good example of great branded content.
John Deere has had a magazine for 100 years.
Yeah.
The tractor company.
But obviously it's changed now, hasn't it? With the immediacy, you can engage with your consumers, your stakeholders in so many more ways immediately. You don't have to go through a third-party media company, and there are lots of new influencers out there as well. So explain what's the special sauce that Story brings to the mix, if you like, because you're not a PR agency, you're not an advertising agency, you're not a digital agency. How do you fit into the matrix, if you like?
Well, we used to say that we're a storytelling agency, and that the way that we fitted in to the mix was that traditional advertising as we know it is if not dead, because people are still spending $600 billion a year on TV and print globally. So but it's evolving. It's certainly.
Are we in a
morphing.
post-advertising age, Simon?
I was going to say that. You took the words right out of my mouth. Go to postadvertisingage.com and you'll see the Story blog. A little bit of self-promo.
Yeah, that's fine.
Blatant self-promo.
That's
but actually, you said it, not me.
I did.
Yeah, we are. And so for us, post-advertising means that you don't interrupt somebody's content experience. You become the channel. You don't rent. You own. And everybody. That's why everybody's downloading ad blockers for their browser software, because they don't want their content experience to be interrupted by a message they don't want. So that's what we set about. We set about as storytellers, and I think we're more. Everybody's now a storyteller, and actually I think technology in the last 2 or 3 years enables you with consumers to be part of the story, and so we're focusing on 2 things. One is helping brands understand their narrative. So, because if they're going to become content publishers, if they're going to create stories, then they have to know what their story platform is. And I'm sure PRWeek has a narrative platform, a story platform that is your filter for how do you make sense of the news and what's your voice. And so we help brands find that from a publishing perspective. And it's got to be ownable. It's got to be true. It's got to be authentic. And then they have to base every single piece of content they produce, every story they produce, whether it's a TV spot or a blog or an app or a piece of video, a movie, but anything has to ladder back to that core narrative. It's a sort of unifying principle that really gives the brand the sort of ownable space, the authority to publish.
So if we talk a lot about PESO, i.e. the mix of paid, earned, shared and owned media, and owned would be the brand content, shared would be the social media distribution of it or elsewhere, earned would be the traditional PR bit, and paid would be the advertising paid for part. Are you kind of doing all of those bits, or are you just concentrating on the owned bit?
No, all of those bits. I mean, you have to think about, the whole media landscape is changing, and so it's not to say that, if you have the budget and the audience will pay attention, that paid doesn't stand a chance. That you use it, you can. It's a great conversation starter, as publishers, and brands really have to start thinking about themselves as publishers and like publishers, which is, well, what happens next? What's the audience journey? So great, and I think there's some really great examples of some great earned content out there, but it happens in the silo. There's nothing that happens next. It's a campaign, and I think for brands to be really effective in the post-advertising age, you have to, it's always on. You have to think about what happens next. Great, you see a TV spot, then it's got to drive you somewhere else, and you can't have 7 different agencies creating completely disparate experiences. And I think that's another way that I would describe post-advertising, is that we're in the kind of the experiential age. All of these experiential technologies like VR, AR, 360 video, projection mapping, allow people to become part of the brand experience. And so we're sort of morphing from storytelling, where it's the brand doing the telling, and it implies that somebody's doing the telling and somebody's doing the listening, to a much more collaborative experience.
And almost a physical engagement in the stories.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
all those new things.
Absolutely. I mean, we're going to talk about Uber next, but suddenly 200,000 people disconnect, cancel their Uber app.
Yeah.
That's a prime example of why brands that are that live in people's lives, like Uber, need to really have an authentic story to combat that.
When did you start seeing a shift from working on mostly print content, or typed out content, I guess I should say, to a wider range of things on behalf of brands?
It's every time there was a new technology that was introduced, it was sort of a quantum shift in how brands or how audiences were consuming content. So, in 1995, it was the web. In 99 or 98, it was email, and then it was mobile in the early 2000s, and then it's social, and now it's all of these these really immersive technologies like VR and AR. I think it's going to change. It changes the way that people live, and therefore for brands to be relevant, you have to sort of have some kind of contextual. You've got to matter to people.
Mm-hmm. Do you think VR is a viable marketing tool right now, or is it still in its infancy?
Yes and no. I think it's the early adopters can create great experiences using VR, and there's some amazing examples out there. But the people, if you look at the headset sales, it's still very limited. So and probably the people that are using headsets are the influencers, and so they're a valid market to go after. But it's still very very early days. And it's people have been, it's a bit like mobile. People have been predicting mobile is going to be the technology of the year for the last 10 or 15 years, and maybe it's true now. Mobile is it's the way that we live.
Absolutely.
And I think VR has the same potential to become the next sort of mobile.
So give us a couple of quick examples of particularly noteworthy brand content that you guys have worked on at Story, just to illustrate those things, those theories in practice, if you like.
My favourite story, although this is it's a little dated, was with Klondike, part of Unilever, the ice cream brand, and we were their digital content storytelling agency, which for us is all the same. Whether digital AOR, it's going to be a narrative approach. So we created a whole digital ecosystem for them, a content ecosystem that included social and mobile and their main sort of brand website, as well as eCRM and email and so on. With Adam Carolla, what would you do for a Klondike bar? And we, typically in the CPG space for a campaign, you're looking at maybe a 1% lift, 1.5% if you're lucky. This campaign created a 13% lift in sales overnight. And it was so powerful that they ran out of wrappers for the bar.
13%?
Yeah, it's huge. And it was completely unprecedented, unexpected, and so they had to suddenly rush manufacture these boxes to put the ice creams in, or the ice lollies. So that, say ice lollies in this country? I've only been here for 21 years, you think I'd know.
Ice cream bar, I think.
Ice cream bar, okay, ice cream bar, thank you. They had to create boxes for the ice cream bars, and we had to come up with a story for what's up with the ice cream bar, with a box for the ice cream bar. And so that's a really powerful story about just how content can
yeah, and that's a measurement as chief marketing officer and a brand manager can understand, and a CEO actually. So those are the stories we love to tell. So.
Sure.
Yeah, great stuff. And then just quickly, you got bought out by Next 15. What, about a year ago was it? Which is
2 years.
2 years ago.
3 months and about 7 days ago.
Okay.
But I mean, nobody's
counting. No. Next 15 owns firms like Tex 100, M Booth, Outcast Agency, great, some great brands, and on the West Coast particularly, but globally. So how's that sort of changed your business, and how is it helping you move forward?
It's been an interesting experience, because we were part of Interpublic
originally,
till 2005 when we brought ourselves back, and I have to say that was a pretty miserable experience. And it was, I think it was also at a time, in the sort of early 2000s where agencies were really struggling to stay relevant, in the digital age, and then next thing you know, you've got social channels, and you've got all these other ways of disrupting these disruptive technologies, and we could see at that point that the future was not to bang people over the head with matching luggage and hope that they're going to pay attention. Interruption doesn't work. So they didn't understand, they didn't get it, and they were quite happy when we left. With Next 15, they have a very clear vision of how the future of marketing is going to evolve, and it involves content, and it involves technology, and it involves data. And so for them, I think Story was made a great strategic fit. And for us, they have the resources, the global network, and a culture actually as a holding company that's very supportive. And it's been a great experience.
Yeah, no, great. Good to hear. And we look forward to seeing how you progress in that. Thanks, Simon. We'll chat to you in the news stories that we're going to discuss. Frank, some interesting moves this week. Torod Neptune, as long-time Verizon executives, moved over to Lenovo, and Gary Sheffer started working at Weber. A couple of interesting ones.
Yeah, Torod Neptune, I think, probably best known to people for his work at Verizon, is taking on the VP of Communications role at Lenovo. It's a global role, so a really interesting move while staying in the technology sector for Torod Neptune. Gary Sheffer, who of course is known to people as the former head of comms at General Electric, has started working on a part-time basis formally with Weber Shandwick. He's been collaborating with them since late last year. And one thing that's interesting about Gary is when you talk to executives in the PR industry, so many of them have worked at GE at one point or another. It's like the deep bench concept that you hear about in sports. So two interesting moves there.
Yeah, and Weber's picking up some interesting people there. Don Spetner, our columnist, who actually was a former guest on this podcast, also working over there. Three dudes. We're going to talk about International Women's Day, but we're going to bring in our health reporter, Alison Kansky, to join us for this one. Alison, International Women's Day on Wednesday got an incredible amount of attention, didn't it? And loads of brands got involved, and there were lots of op-eds and talk and etc. And actually, PRWeek, we announced our Hall of Femme honorees for this year as well this week to tie in with that. What do you think of the whole concept of International Women's Day? Because I've spoken to some women who think it's fantastic and it's brilliant and a great chance to honour, etc. And then I speak to women who say, well, it's BS, frankly, not to put too fine a point on it. Why do we need it? It's not the right way to go. What are your views? I'm interested.
I think it's great. I mean, it's a great opportunity to recognize everything women have done, because a lot of times, countries and companies are mostly run by men, more or less, women's accomplishments just aren't as well known. So I think it's a great opportunity to talk about that.
Yeah, and we did see some interesting brand engagements, didn't we, Frank?
Sure.
Were there a couple of notable ones that stood out for you?
Well, one thing that I think really stood out to me was that how established the International Women's Day has become and how many brand partners they've brought on over the past couple of years. And a lot of them are not just U.S. companies, very international in scope, very, very sizable companies. So it's a very established thing now, International Women's Day is, and it's supported by a lot of powerful companies and powerful people.
It felt particularly resonant this year, but obviously we've had those women's marches in the United States. Simon, you got any views on this, the whole thing?
I think the way you set it up was right. I think that some people absolutely support it. It's absolutely right that women are acknowledged for the power that they bring to the workplaces and to life generally. But I sent out a message to everybody at work yesterday, just acknowledging that, and also thinking about the fact that some of our senior women go to the 3% conference, and I was like, well, 3%, what's that all about? Oh, it's to acknowledge that only 3% of the leadership in the advertising and marketing industry are women. And I was like, oh, really? Gosh. So I did a count. We have a senior leadership team of 6 people, of which 3 are women. So we're going to change that to the 50% conference.
Well, that's good to know. But I mean, I was at an event last week actually, organised by Cannes. They've got a See It Be It program where they get female creative directors the chance to go to Cannes for the week and then experience the whole show. But it's true. Only 1 in 10 creative directors are female, and that's really way too low, and you're not going to get representative work like that. So there is a long way to go, and that people like Cindy Gallup and Madonna Badger and lots of other women and the people on this program were so inspiring. So I'm really pleased to see things like that going on, because I do think it needs to change. And looking at the Glass Lions at Cannes, which are celebrating diverse work and work that celebrates gender equality. I wrote a blog on this last week, actually. You know, when you saw the first year of it, it was still all guys coming up. Even the gender equality work was all being done by guys, you know, because there was there's such a disparity. Yeah. Apart from the Always Like a Girl campaign, I must pull that one out. So I'm really pleased that Cannes has responded to, not just on that front, but also on the sexist advertising front, so that they're not going to allow sexist adverts to be part of the contest and to be awarded. And that's been partly a response to people campaigning, but also fair play to them. They've responded, and they've got this See It, Be It campaign going. So there are things happening, and I feel like things are changing. So I really do feel more positive about this than maybe I have done.
Well, and people vote, with their checkbooks, right? So last night I was heading out with a client, a female client, and we were heading downtown. All right, let's get an Uber. So this just dovetails a little bit with the Uber story. But my client was like, on today's of all days, I don't think we should use an Uber. Do you mind if we get a cab? And I was like, oh yeah, no, of course. And so and I'm sure that wasn't the only conversation of that type of the day.
Simon, that's a great segue. Shall we talk about Uber?
Well,
Frank?
I wondered if somebody was going to.
Eventually, yeah. Yeah, it's a good point, actually, and people are voting with their feet, aren't they, on that one? Just sum up what's going on, Frank. I mean, we've seen
where to start
there's a culture problem. There seems to be a culture problem at Uber, doesn't there?
Well, I think that's very safe to say at this point that there is a cultural issue happening there. So they've had a really rough few weeks reputation-wise. I think that this started out 2 weekends ago when one of their former engineers, Susan Fowler, wrote a blog post about how she claims to have been sexually harassed in the workplace at Uber. She said she took these complaints to the HR department and the HR department ignored them, and that she wasn't the only woman working there who this happened to. This was a very common story. So there's that. There's also the gray ball issue, which Uber was using this technology that they were calling gray ball to avoid law enforcement and other types of authorities in areas where people were opposed to their service starting up. So they have a number of issues. Oh, and we're forgetting Travis Kalanick getting in an argument with one of his drivers and then getting caught on video for it, which is not a great look. So all of those things combined, it's been a really terrible few weeks reputationally for Uber, sure.
Yeah, and they can do without that, because I think they've got enough on their hands with this whole regulatory thing, haven't they? Without all the other cultural stuff and the poor image and poor optics that are coming over. And there does seem to be something of a brotastic culture there that needs, maybe they need to really address.
Brotastic is an interesting term for it, though. But I think if you followed Uber for the past couple of years, though, some of these allegations aren't all that shocking to you. I mean, if you've read a lot about the company and you've read a lot of Kalanick's interviews, I mean, there has always been this very bro-ish sense of the company, I think.
And it's interesting that Jeff Jones from Target has gone over there, hasn't he? And Rachel Whetstone, really two incredibly respected figures. Rachel's on the communications side, Jeff on the marketing and more side. But they've got their hands full, I think. They've definitely got their hands full.
They do, for sure. And I think the thing to watch going forward is that Uber has confirmed they're doing a CLO search, that they want to bring in a number 2. There's a lot of consensus out there in the media that they'd be very smart to hire a woman for that role. Somebody, very Sheryl Sandberg-like. So the thing to watch is to see who they hire for that position.
I think it's got to go further than that, though. I mean, I think they have to be really transparent. That's a start, right? Yeah. And then hopefully that'll filter down throughout the whole organisation. But they've got to start now. You had 200,000 people cancelling Uber in a week that had such a dramatic impact on their software that they had to reboot it and to redo it. If that continues at that rate, it's not as though we don't have alternatives.
Right.
I mean, I think they've enjoyed somewhat of a monopoly because the taxi companies haven't got their act together, and they've just been trying. Their response has been to sue and not to compete, and Lyft is still a distant second when it comes to numbers. So I think they've still got they've still got the numbers, but they don't have the trust. And if there's a viable alternative, if they were a close number 2, I think they'd be in a world of hurt.
Yeah,
but it's not going to take long.
No, that really speaks to this modern world, doesn't it? Where you can lose your brand equity in minutes online, you know, and this is why all this is so important.
So I think that's why they've got to be really transparent and say this is a problem. I would actually fire the CEO. I think that's the best statement they can make, that we are not, you know, that the sort of the trust of Uber, the brain trust of Uber, is not going to accept this going forward. He, as the CEO, as the main sort of protagonist of this culture, has to go.
It's really interesting, Simon, and you talk about Lyft there, they are a second place, but they have got a very different culture, and they've always positioned themselves as a slightly more touchy-feely, you know, hands-on with the pink moustaches on the cars.
They should need to replace the pink moustaches with pussy hats. Well, seriously, that one move, I think, would probably migrate half of Uber's base.
But I think they are, it's a great opportunity for them as a competitor, I guess, to get their culture over. That brings us, again, segueing nicely into our Communicator of the Year, because it's Oscar Munoz, who's CEO of United Airlines, and he came into an organisation where the CEO had actually resigned due to, you know, some controversy around federal investigations there, and a very demotivated organisation, an organisation that had merged. Continental and United had merged 5 years ago, but they were still kind of operating separately. The cultures hadn't meshed. And Oscar came in and really did make a massive change in quite a short space of time, and he did that by engaging the staff, basically. He really did get around, talk to them. People liked him. He was a blue-collar guy. His dad was a union man. Unions in the airline industry, really important. He's done all these deals with the unions ahead of schedule, which is unheard of. And he's done all this actually at a time when he had a heart attack, which led to him requiring a heart transplant earlier this year. So, and then he was back at work, you know, within a few short months. So it's an incredible story, and obviously there's a lot more work to be done there. But he's done some great things. He brought in Jim Olsen from Starbucks as the head of communications. He brought in a chief storyteller, which for an airline is quite a bold move. You know?
I think he would move that to chief story maker, then I think they're going to go places. That's the next phase.
Yeah, for sure, and employ story worldwide to help them do that. Yeah, but yeah, really great story, and we're really proud to have Oscar coming to our awards next Thursday, actually, March the 16th, to come and accept our Communicator of the Year honour. And yeah, it's really looking forward to the evening. Hope everyone's going to join us. There's still a few tickets left if you want to go to the website. But we're looking forward to that, and looking forward to honouring Oscar. Frank, let's finish with healthcare legislation.
Right, the least complicated topic.
Well, not really, but
30 seconds.
You're the man to explain it.
We're in the opening stages of this for sure, and the House Republicans bill has passed 2 committees. However, there's a lot of opposition to it from conservative groups, fiscally conservative groups, but also from the medical community. Should point out that the American Medical Association has been against it. They're a very influential healthcare group. And the White House is supporting the bill. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this. I mean, if the bill is hopeless and there are Republican senators saying that it's not going to get passed, you know, how much time does the White House actually spend trying to sell the public on how great this bill is instead of just moving on to the next thing? So something we're keeping an eye on, something really is in tremendous amount of coverage in the mainstream press about. So yes, another topic we're looking at in the next few months.
Yeah, I've been going around doing agency business report interviews the last couple of weeks and asking people, you know, what impact is this going to have on your health clients? And I think most of them, it's too early to say, which is a bit of a cop-out. But, you know, they don't really know yet.
No, I think they're right, though. I mean, I think they're correct not to jump to any conclusions yet, because there are a lot of things that can happen with not even this bill, but what might be the next bill. So it's going to be interesting to watch.
It is, it certainly is, and you're the man to unpick it all for us, along with Alison Kamsky, our healthcare reporter. So thank you for your contributions. Thanks, Alison. Thanks, Frank. Simon, great to have you as a guest.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Very bold, calling for Travis to step down, or to be fired, in fact.
Either way, something's got to happen.
No, interesting, good stuff. So don't forget, like I said, PR Week Awards, Thursday the 16th, the biggest night of the PR calendar. We have our Brand Film Festival gala screening in New York City on May the 4th, and we have our Global Awards event in London on May the 11th, and we released the shortlist for those this week. So there's a lot going on, and we didn't even have time to talk about those, so go and check them out on the website, prweek.com. Otherwise, we'll see you next time on the PR Week.